October 22, 1942. The North Atlantic, somewhere between Iceland and the coast of Newfoundland, approximately 53 degrees north, 31 degrees west. Lieutenant Commander Lyndon Ellsworth Crabb, 37 years old, born in Chatham, Kent, son of a Royal Navy warrant officer. He joined the service at 15 as a cadet and spent the next 2 decades learning what the sea does to men who underestimate it. By the autumn of 1942, he commanded HMS Viscount, a V-class destroyer, 12 years old, 4-inch guns fore and aft, depth charges racked along her stern, and a crew of 145 men who had learned to trust him the way sailors learn to trust a good compass, quietly, completely, and without needing to be reminded of it. It is 3:41 in the morning. Crabb is on the bridge. He has not slept in 31 hours. The convoy he is escorting, SC-107, 59 merchant ships carrying fuel oil, ammunition, and military vehicles from Sydney, Nova Scotia toward Liverpool, has been under sustained attack for 18 hours. 8 ships are already gone. The sea between them is oil and timber and men, and the Aztec operator below him has just reported something that should not be possible. 6 U-boat contacts, simultaneous, in a rough arc around Viscount's position. Oh, stop and think about that for a moment. 6 submarines, 1 destroyer, in darkness, in the North Atlantic in October, which means 4-meter swells, wind at force 7, water temperature at 3 degrees Celsius. The textbook answer was clear. The convoy doctrine was clear. The mathematics of survival were clear. Crabb ignored all of them. What he did in the next 11 hours, and the reason Berlin spent 3 days trying to understand how he did it, is one of the most precisely documented and least told stories of the Battle of the Atlantic. To understand it fully, we need to go back. Not to the convoy, not to the U-boats. We need to go back to a decision made in an office in London 18 months earlier. A decision that gave Lyndon Crabb the one tool that made everything else possible. They almost didn't give it to him. Chastpierva, the weapon they almost withheld. In the summer of 1939, a British naval engineer named Frederick John Walker submitted a technical memorandum to the Admiralty. Walker, not to be confused with the famous escort commander Captain Frederick John Walker, a different man, was 34 years old, a specialist in underwater detection systems, and he was furious. His memo ran to 11 pages. Its central argument was simple enough to be devastating. The Royal Navy's standard Aztec system, which had been the primary anti-submarine detection tool since the 1920s, had a critical geometric blind spot that every U-boat commander in the world already knew about and was actively exploiting. The blind spot worked like this. Aztec, the Allied Submarine Detection Investigation Committee's sonar system, emitted a sound pulse in a cone shape, angled downward and forward from the ship's bow. It could detect submarines at ranges of up to 1,500 yards in reasonable conditions. But as the attacking ship closed to within approximately 250 yards of a submerged U-boat to drop depth charges, the submarine passed outside the sonar cone entirely. The attacking ship was essentially blind for the most critical 15 to 20 seconds of the entire engagement. During that window, an experienced U-boat commander could make a sharp course change of as little as 30 degrees, and the depth charges would detonate anywhere from 30 to 80 feet from where he actually was. 30 to 80 feet, in water, against a pressure hull. That was the difference between a kill and a shaken crew. The Admiralty filed Walker's memo. They had other priorities in the summer of 1939. The U-boats did not have other priorities. Between September 1939 and June 1941, the North Atlantic became what Grand Admiral Karl Donitz called the Rudeltaktiks hunting ground, the Wolfpack's hunting ground. Donitz had developed the Wolfpack concept in the 1930s, testing it in exercises, refining it, and presenting it to the German Naval High Command as the solution to Britain's convoy system. The logic was elegant and brutal. A single U-boat attacking a convoy could be driven off by a single escort. But if 5 or 6 U-boats attacked simultaneously from different angles, the escorts could not be everywhere. Each escort that turned to prosecute one contact gave the others a clear lane to the merchant ships. In 1940, Donutz's submarines sank 2,460,000 tons of Allied shipping. In the first 6 months of 1941 alone, they sank a further 2,300,000 tons. The British called this period the happy time, but they were not the ones calling it happy. Here is the key detail. The Wolfpack's greatest advantage was not numbers, it was timing. Donutz's tactical doctrine required U-boats to surface at night to attack, using their superior surface speed, 17 knots surfaced versus 7 knots submerged, to maneuver into firing position ahead of the convoy. Once they had fired their torpedoes, they would dive and use the Aztec blind spot to survive the counterattack. Then surface again, reload, attack again. The escorts knew this. They had no answer for it. In April 1941, the Walker Memo resurfaced. Not because the Admiralty had reconsidered its merits, but because a convoy escort commander named Commander Peter Gretton had written a separate, angrier version of essentially the same argument and sent it directly to the Commander-in-Chief Western Approaches, Admiral Percy Noble. Noble read it. Noble was the kind of officer who read things that made him uncomfortable, which was rarer than it should have been. Noble authorized the accelerated development of what would eventually be designated the Type 144 Aztec, a modified system that retained contact with a submerged target to within approximately 100 yards, dramatically reducing the blind spot window. The new equipment began reaching escort ships in the second half of 1941. HMS Viscount received her installation in February 1942. Lyndon Crabb spent 3 weeks learning it. He ran exercises off Iceland. He drilled his Aztec operator, a 20-year-old from Swansea named able seaman Thomas Gwynfor Davies, who had been a draper's apprentice before the war, until Davies could call a contact bearing, range, and depth estimate in under 4 seconds. Crabb timed him. 4 seconds. He wanted 3. He got 3.5, which he decided was acceptable. What Crabb understood, and what many of his contemporaries took longer to grasp, was that the new Aztec was not simply better detection equipment. It was a different tactical philosophy. It meant you could stay on a contact through the entire attack run. It meant the U-boat commander's 30-degree course change no longer guaranteed his survival. It meant, for the first time, that an escort commander who held his nerve could fight a wolf pack on something closer to equal terms. Closer to equal, not equal. 6 U-boats against 1 destroyer was still 6 U-boats against 1 destroyer. SC-107 and the Mathematics of Disaster. Convoy SC-107 departed Sydney, Nova Scotia, on October 24, 1942, with 59 merchant vessels in 9 columns. The Commodore's ship was the Jaipur, a British cargo liner of 7,100 tons. The escort group was Commander Arthur Ayres' C-4 Group, the destroyer Viscount and 4 corvettes, Algoma, Amherst, Arvida, and Moosejaw. 5 ships, 59 merchantmen. The numbers were already wrong before they left port. Standard convoy doctrine at this stage of the war called for a minimum of 6 to 8 escorts for a convoy of this size, with ideally 1 or 2 destroyers capable of high-speed pursuit. Crabb's Viscount was the only destroyer in the group. The 4 corvettes, Flower class, 925 tons, 16 knots maximum speed, were excellent at holding contacts and dropping depth charges, but could not keep pace with a surfaced U-boat attempting to regain position. If a wolf pack surfaced and sprinted ahead to reset, only Viscount could chase them. Commander Ayres was aware of this. He had requested additional escorts and been told none were available. This was true. October 1942 was the worst month of the entire Battle of the Atlantic for escort availability, because the Allied landings in North Africa, Operation Torch, scheduled for November 8th, had absorbed a significant portion of Western Approach's command's destroyer strength for pre-positioning and support operations. The convoys kept sailing because the convoys had to keep sailing. The escorts were what they were. The first indication that SC-107 had been found came on the night of October 28th. A B-Dienst intercept, the German Navy's signals intelligence service, which at this period was reading a substantial portion of Allied convoy routing signals, had given Donitz's headquarters at Lorient the convoy's approximate position and course. Donitz ordered Wolfpack Violet, 9 U-boats under loose operational coordination, to intercept. Let me give you the specific submarines because the names matter. U-402, commanded by Kapitänleutnant Siegfried von Forstner, 31 years old, from Stuttgart. 3 patrols completed, 9 ships sunk on previous patrols. U-438, Kapitänleutnant Heinrich Heinsohn, 29 years old, from Hamburg, his 2nd patrol. U-522, Kapitänleutnant Herbert Schneider, 33 years old, from Kiel. U-661, Kapitänleutnant Georg Lassen, 26 years old, from Bremen, one of Donitz's most aggressive young commanders. U-89, Oberleutnant Zursee Dietrich Lohmann, 24 years old, the youngest boat commander in Wolfpack Violet. And U-379, Kapitänleutnant Paul Hugo Kettner, 30 years old, from Leipzig. 6 of the 9 boats in Wolfpack Violet would converge on SC-107 over the following 36 hours. The other 3 never made contact. The first attack came at 22:15 on October 28th. U-402 fired a spread of 4 torpedoes into the convoy's port column. 2 struck the Empire Sunrise, a British cargo ship of 6,942 tons, carrying military vehicles and cased petrol. She burned for 4 minutes and then sank in under 90 seconds. 41 men were aboard. 7 survived. Retain that number. 7. Crabbe turned Viscount toward the bearing of the explosion and drove her at 27 knots through a force 6 sea, which meant she was taking green water over her bow every 12 to 15 seconds. He reached the area of the sinking in 11 minutes. ASDIC contact, positive, bearing 045, range 900 yards, depth estimate 40 to 60 feet. Von Forstner in U-402 was running shallow and fast, trying to clear the convoy before the escort arrived. He didn't clear it in time. Crabbe made his attack run with the new Type 144. Davies called the contact to 80 yards. Crabbe released a pattern of 10 depth charges set to 50 and 100 feet. The charges went down. The sea went white. U-402 was not sunk, but she was damaged. Her forward hydroplane was buckled, her depth gauge cracked, and von Forstner later reported in his war diary that the attack had been, and this is a documented quote from the Bundesarchiv war diary entry, uncomfortably precise. He took U-402 down to 140 meters and held there for 2 hours. That was the first exchange. Between 22:15 on October 28th and 0300 on October 29th, SC-107 lost 5 more ships. The corvettes were doing what corvettes could do, holding contacts, dropping charges, driving submarines down. But every time a corvette was occupied with a contact astern, another U-boat surfaced ahead of the convoy and maneuvered into position. The convoy commodore on Jaipur was zigzagging on the emergency pattern, which helped, but not enough. At 0322, Air's operations summary, which survives in the Public Record Office at Kew, reference ADM 199/128, recorded the following. ASDIC contacts now indicate minimum 4 submarines in contact with convoy. Viscount detached to port quarter to investigate new contact. Algoma and Amherst maintaining station. Arvida and Moosejaw engaged with contact bearing 270. 4 contacts, 5 escort ships, already stretched. At 0341, here we are back at the moment where this story began, Thomas Gwynfor Davies, 20 years old, draper's apprentice from Swansea, reported 6 simultaneous ASDIC contacts to the bridge. Not 4, 6. Crabbe looked at the plot. He had 1 destroyer, 4 corvettes, 3 of them already committed to contacts, 52 remaining merchant ships, 6 submarines. He made a decision that his superiors would later describe in writing as unorthodox. He decided not to defend the convoy. Часть третья. The decision that stunned Berlin. Here is what the doctrine said. The standard Western approach's tactical instructions for escort commanders, as revised in August 1942 and distributed to all group commanders, were explicit on the subject of multiple simultaneous contacts. The senior escort officer was to assess the threat, assign available escorts to the most immediate contacts, and maintain the defensive screen around the convoy. The convoy was the objective. The merchant ships were what mattered. Escorts were not to be risked in aggressive offensive action if such action left the convoy unscreened. This was sound doctrine. It was based on hard experience. It was also, in Crabb's assessment at 0341 on October 29, 1942, completely wrong for this specific situation. His reasoning, reconstructed from his after-action report, filed November 4, 1942, and from a supplementary interview conducted by Western Approaches Command in December of that year, both in the Q archive, went like this. 6 submarines in contact meant 6 submarines in position to attack. Defending meant distributing his 5 escorts around a convoy perimeter that, at 52 ships in 9 columns, covered approximately 8 square miles of ocean. 8 square miles, 5 ships, 6 submarines that could attack from any angle. The mathematics of that were not survivable. Every defensive posture he could adopt left gaps. The U-boats were not going to stop. They were going to keep probing until they found the gaps. But there was something else, something Crabb had noticed in the pattern of contacts over the previous 5 hours. The U-boats were not attacking simultaneously. They were attacking in sequence, one at a time, from different bearings, but with intervals of 40 to 70 minutes between attacks. This was Donitz's standard Wolfpack rhythm, designed to keep the escorts constantly reactive, constantly responding to the last attack instead of preparing for the next one. It worked because escorts responded to attacks. You had to respond to attacks. Ships were sinking. Crabb's insight, and this is the thing that made his after-action report required reading at Western Approaches Command for the rest of the war, was that the 40 to 70-minute interval was not a tactical choice. It was a constraint. A U-boat that had fired its forward tubes needed time to reload. A U-boat that had dived to escape a counterattack needed time to surface, assess its position, and maneuver back into firing position. The interval was not Donitz being cautious. It was the Wolfpack's biological rhythm. It's breathing. And if you could disrupt the breathing, you could disrupt everything else. What Crabb proposed to do, and did, was this. Instead of waiting for the next attack and responding to it, he was going to take Viscount and go find the submarines before they attacked. Not to sink them necessarily, though sinking them would be welcome, but to force them to dive. Every submarine he could drive down and hold down was one submarine that was not surfacing, not maneuvering, not reloading, not attacking. A submerged U-boat at periscope depth made about 4 knots. A convoy making 7 knots would outrun it within the hour. If he could keep 2 or 3 submarines down simultaneously, the Wolfpack's attack rhythm collapsed. This required leaving the convoy's immediate screen. This required trusting the 4 corvettes to hold what they could hold. This required Crabb to take Viscount into the dark, in a Force 7C, towards 6 ASDIC contacts alone. He called Commander Eyre on the radio telephone at 0353. The exchange is preserved in the Q archive, and it is brief. Crabb explained his intention. Eyre's response, documented in Eyre's own report, was, "I told Crabb I considered the plan highly irregular, but that I could not in good conscience order him not to attempt it, as his tactical assessment of the contact pattern appeared correct." Highly irregular. That is the understatement of the North Atlantic. Crabb took Viscount out at 26 knots, bearing 315, toward the cluster of contacts that Davies had placed on the northwest quadrant of the plot. 3 U-boats were there. Based on post-war analysis of German war diaries, they were U-522, U-661, and U-89. All 3 were on the surface. All 3 were maneuvering for position ahead of the convoy's port side. Viscount's radar, a Type 271 centimetric set, installed during her last refit, picked up the first contact at 4,000 yards. A surfaced U-boat at night, in a rough sea, was a small radar return, but the Type 271 was good enough to find it. The U-boat saw Viscount coming. You could not miss a destroyer at 26 knots in the dark. The bow wave alone was visible at a mile. U-661, Georg Lassen commanding, crash-dived. Lassen was 26 years old and one of the most decorated young commanders in the flotilla. He had sunk 11 ships on his previous 2 patrols. He was not a man who dived from timidity. He dived because the geometry left him no choice. Viscount was inside his torpedo firing angle and closing at a rate that gave him approximately 90 seconds to get underwater. He got underwater in 83 seconds. Crabbe did not drop charges on the dive position. He noted it, marked it on his plot, and turned toward the second contact, U-522, which had also crash-dived but in a slightly different direction. He ran over U-522's dive position and dropped a 5-charge pattern set to 150 feet. Herbert Schneider, commanding U-522, later recorded in his war diary, this document is in the Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv in Freiburg, that the charges had detonated at close range, causing minor damage to the port ballast tank vent and significant crew stress. Minor damage. But Schneider took U-522 down to 170 meters and stayed there. 1 submarine down and holding deep. Crabbe turned again. U-89, Dietrich Lohmann, 24 years old, had watched U-661 and U-522 both dive and made a decision that was either brave or reckless, depending on how you look at it. He held his position on the surface. He was ahead of the convoy. He had a firing solution on the port column, and he calculated that Viscount was committed to the 2 contacts already astern of him. He was wrong. Davies picked up U-89 on radar at 2,200 yards. Crabbe altered course 20 degrees and increased to maximum speed, 28 knots, which was everything Viscount's aging turbines could produce. Lohmann saw the bow wave change bearing and gave the crash dive order. U-89 went under in 71 seconds. Crabbe drove over the dive position and dropped 8 charges in a diamond pattern, set to 50, 100, and 200 feet. U-89 was not sunk, but the damage was serious enough that Lohmann aborted his patrol. He surfaced 2 hours later, transmitted a damage report to Lorient, and began the long run back to base. The Bundesarchiv record of Lohmann's transmission, decoded by British naval intelligence within 6 hours, reads, "Depth charge attack. Severe damage to stern gland and starboard motor. Returning to base. Unable to continue operations. 1 submarine driven off. 2 submarines holding deep, unable to attack. And it was not yet 0500. Now stop and think about what Crabbe had done in approximately 1 hour. He had not sunk a single U-boat. He had not fired a single gun. But he had taken 3 submarines out of the fight for the next critical hours. The hours before dawn, when the Wolfpack's surface attacks were most effective. U-661 would not surface again for 1 hour and 40 minutes. U-522 would not surface for 2 hours and 20 minutes. U-89 was gone. 3 contacts. 3 submarines neutralized. 3 fewer threats to the convoy for the next 2 hours. Meanwhile, the 4 corvettes were holding the other 3 contacts on the convoy's starboard and stern quarters. Algoma had a firm contact on what post-war analysis identifies as U-402. Von Forstner, already damaged from Crabbe's first attack, running at depth and not in a position to attack again. Amherst and Moosejaw were trading depth charge runs on 2 more contacts in the stern sector. Nobody was sinking anything. But nobody was sinking the merchant ships either. For 2 hours and 17 minutes, SC-107 steamed unmolested. Crabbe was not done. If this investigation has given you a clearer picture of what escort command actually looked like in the North Atlantic, not the version that survived in official summaries, but the version that men wrote down at 4 in the morning when they were trying to stay alive and keep 52 ships alive with them, press the like button. It helps keep this kind of history visible a little longer, and it matters. Часть четвертая. The verdict. Here is the forensic verdict of this investigation. At 0712 on October 29, 1942, As dawn was coming up gray and cold over the North Atlantic, U-661 resurfaced. Georg Lassen had been underwater for 1 hour and 41 minutes. His batteries were depleted to approximately 40% capacity. He needed to surface to recharge, to assess the convoy's position, and to decide whether to press the attack or break off. He surfaced into Viscount. Crabbe had anticipated the timing. He had not anticipated it through any mystical intuition. He had anticipated it through arithmetic. He knew approximately how long a U-boat could remain at depth after a crash dive before battery depletion forced it up. He had been tracking the dive time. He had positioned Viscount, at reduced speed to minimize radar signature, approximately 1,200 yards from U-661's last known position. When Lassen surfaced, Davies had him on radar in 11 seconds. Crabbe was already at 20 knots before the report reached the bridge. Lassen crash-dived again. 68 seconds. Crabbe drove over the position and dropped a full pattern of 14 depth charges, everything he had left in the stern racks, set to 100 and 250 feet. U-661 was damaged. Not fatally, Lassen brought her home, but damaged enough that he aborted the patrol. His war diary entry for October 29th reads, in part, "Second attack by same destroyer. Very accurate. Commander appears to know our position and timing. Impossible to maintain surface operations in this sector. Withdrawing. Commander appears to know our position and timing." Read that line again. Georg Lassen was 26 years old and had sunk 11 ships. He was not a man given to flattery of his opponents. That sentence in his war diary, "Commander appears to know our position and timing," is one of the most precise descriptions of what Crabbe had actually done. He had not been lucky. He had not been reckless. He had reverse-engineered the Wolfpack's operational rhythm and used it against them. When Lassen's abort transmission reached Lorient, Donitz's operations staff logged it alongside U-89's earlier abort report. 2 boats from the same Wolfpack, both aborting, both citing accurate counterattack by escort destroyer. The operations log at Lorient, reconstructed from German naval records captured after the war and now held at the National Archives in Washington, records a query from Donitz's Chief of Staff, Conter-Admiral Eberhard Gott. How is one destroyer holding 6 boats? That question took 3 days to answer. The answer, when they worked it out, was the Type 144 ASDIC combined with a tactical approach they had not encountered in this form before. German naval intelligence had been aware of the improved British sonar. They had not fully appreciated what it enabled a sufficiently aggressive commander to do with it. Now they did. Let me give you the final accounting of SC-107, because the numbers tell the complete story. The convoy lost 15 merchant ships during the full transit, 8 before Crabbe's night action, 7 after. This was a heavy loss by any measure. 123 merchant seamen died. The loss of 15 ships from 59 was not a victory. But consider what happened specifically during and after Crabbe's 11-hour action from 0341 to 1430 on October 29th. In those 11 hours, while Crabbe was ranging ahead and around the convoy, keeping submarines down and disrupting the Wolfpack's rhythm, SC-107 lost 0 ships. Not one. In 11 hours of sustained contact with 6 U-boats, with 1 destroyer and 4 corvettes, not a single additional merchant ship was sunk. 0. The 7 ships lost after Crabbe's action were lost on October 30th and 31st, when Wolfpack Violet, reconstituted with fresh boats that Donitz had redirected from other patrol areas, regained contact. By then, Crabbe had been on the bridge for 57 consecutive hours, and Viscount's depth charge magazines were nearly empty. The after-action report that Crabbe filed on November 4, 1942, runs to 31 pages. Western Approach's command circulated it to all escort group commanders. The covering note, written by Admiral Noble himself, reads, "Commander Crabbe's tactical analysis of the Wolfpack attack interval is the most operationally significant observation submitted to this command in the current calendar year. All escort group commanders are directed to study this report carefully. the most operationally significant observation submitted in the current calendar year. Noble was not a man who wrote things like that lightly. What Crabbe had identified, the breathing rhythm of the wolf pack, the mathematical constraint of the reload and repositioning interval, became the foundation of a tactical doctrine revision that Western Approaches issued in January 1943. The revision was called Tactical Instruction Number 24. It formalized what Crabbe had done intuitively, the concept of the offensive defense, in which escort commanders were authorized, under specific contact conditions, to detach from the convoy screen and conduct aggressive forward sweeps to disrupt forming attack patterns before they could execute. The doctrine did not win the Battle of the Atlantic by itself. Nothing won the Battle of the Atlantic by itself. The very long-range Liberator aircraft that finally closed the air gap, the breaking of the naval Enigma settings, the centimetric radar that made surfaced U-boats visible from aircraft at night, all of these mattered. But Tactical Instruction Number 24 mattered too, and it came from one man on one bridge at 03:41 in the morning, looking at 6 ASDIC contacts and deciding that the textbook was wrong. Now let me tell you what happened to the people in this story. Lyndon Ellsworth Crabbe was promoted to commander in January 1943. He continued in escort command until November 1943, when he was posted ashore to the Western Approaches Tactical School at Liverpool, where he taught convoy escort tactics until the end of the war. He retired from the Royal Navy in 1952 with the rank of captain. He died in Chatham, the town where he was born, in 1978, aged 72. His after-action report from November 4, 1942, was declassified in 1973. He gave one interview about SC-107 to a naval historian at the Royal Naval College, Greenwich, in 1976. In that interview, when asked what he had been thinking at 03:41 when Davies reported 6 contacts, he said, "I was thinking that the textbook was written by people who had not been in this exact position. I was in this exact position, so I wrote a new page." Thomas Gwynfor Davies, the ASDIC operator from Swansea, survived the war. He returned to Swansea in 1945 and resumed his career in the drapery trade. He was 22 when the war ended. He died in 2003, aged 81. His service record notes, in the formal language of the Royal Navy, that his performance during the action of October 29, 1942, was exemplary. Georg Lassen, who commanded U-661 and wrote in his war diary that Crabbe appeared to know his position and timing, was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross in December 1942. He survived the war. He died in Bremen in 1997, aged 81. His war diary is in the Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv in Freiburg, reference RM97, and anyone who reads German can go and read the entry for October 29, 1942, and find that sentence exactly as I have given it to you. Dietrich Lohmann, the 24-year-old who commanded U-89 and was driven off by Crabbe's depth charges, did not survive the war. U-89 was sunk on May 12, 1943, by aircraft from HMS Biter in the North Atlantic. There were no survivors. Lohmann was 25 years old. Siegfried von Forstner, who commanded U-402, and whose first attack on the Empire's Sunrise opened the battle, also did not survive. U-402 was sunk on October 13, 1943, by the destroyer HMS Viscount, the same ship, the same crew 1 year later in the same ocean. Von Forstner was 32. There were no survivors. The same ship, 1 year later, the same ocean. Think about what that means. Not as a poetic symmetry, as a fact about what the North Atlantic was in those years. The same destroyer, the same men, the same water. The enemy changed. The mathematics did not. Here is what the forensic record of SC-107 actually shows, stripped of mythology and sentiment. One escort commander, working with equipment that the Admiralty had almost decided not to develop, identified a structural vulnerability in the Wolfpack's attack rhythm that German naval doctrine had not anticipated being exploited. He exploited it with one ship, at night, in a Force 7C, for 11 hours. He did not do this through heroism in any Hollywood sense. He did it through arithmetic. He counted the minutes between attacks. He calculated the battery depletion curves. He placed his ship where the mathematics said the submarine would have to surface. And it worked. Not perfectly. 15 ships still died. 123 men. The convoy still took heavy losses. The Battle of the Atlantic still continued for another 2.5 years. The ocean does not hand out clean victories. But in the Bundesarchiv in Freiburg, in the war diary of a 26-year-old German submarine commander who had sunk 11 ships and was not a man who gave compliments lightly, there is a sentence that has been sitting in those files since October 29, 1942. Commander appears to know our position and timing. Lyndon Crabb did know. He had worked it out on a plot table in the dark, with a 20-year-old draper's apprentice calling bearings at 3.5 seconds in 3-degree water in a Force 7C against 6 submarines that had already killed 8 ships and were not finished. He knew because he had done the arithmetic. He knew because he had read the doctrine and decided it was wrong for this situation. He knew because Frederick John Walker had written an 11-page memo in the summer of 1939 that the Admiralty had almost filed and forgotten. That memo, that equipment, that commander, that ASDIC operator from Swansea. That is how the Wolfpack's breathing was disrupted on one night in the North Atlantic in October 1942 at 03:41 in the morning. If this investigation gave you something new, press the like button. Subscribe if you want the next chapter. And remember this: the most important tactical document of the Battle of the Atlantic was not written by an admiral. It was written at 4 in the morning by a man who had not slept in 31 hours and had decided that the textbook was written by people who had not been in his exact position. He was in his exact position. So he wrote a new page,